Good evening. I'm Alex Mercer. We're coming to you live with breaking coverage of what is rapidly developing into the most serious national security crisis in American history. At approximately 4:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, multiple foreign military forces began simultaneous amphibious and airborne assaults on the continental United States. We're receiving confirmed reports from the eastern seaboard, the Gulf Coast, and the Pacific Northwest. The Pentagon has elevated to DEFCON 1. The President addressed the nation 17 minutes ago, confirming that we are under attack. Sierra Lane is with me in the studio. Sierra, we're trying to verify information as it comes in, but the scale of what we're seeing is unprecedented.
Alex, thank you. What we know at this hour is that American families from Virginia Beach to San Diego are sheltering in their homes trying to comprehend what's happening. We've been monitoring social media, emergency services channels, and direct messages from listeners across the country. A woman named Rebecca from Norfolk sent us a voice message about 20 minutes ago. She was crying. She said she could hear explosions from the naval base, that her windows were shaking, that she didn't know whether to run or hide with her 2 children. That's the reality for millions of people right now. They're terrified, and they're looking for answers we don't yet have.
Let me provide what we can confirm. The initial wave appears to have targeted major military installations and port cities. Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia, Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington State, Naval Base San Diego, and at least 6 other major defense facilities have reported direct engagement with hostile forces. Early casualty estimates from the Department of Defense, and I want to stress that these are preliminary, suggest several hundred military personnel killed or wounded in the first hour alone. We're also receiving reports of civilian casualties in populated areas near these bases. The attacking forces have been identified as a coalition that includes military units from Russia, China, and North Korea, though we're still working to verify the full extent of international involvement.
And Alex, beyond the military targets, we're hearing about attacks on civilian infrastructure. Power grids in at least 11 states have experienced failures or disruptions. Whether that's due to direct sabotage, cyber attacks, or damage from the fighting, we don't know yet. But what it means is that millions of Americans are sitting in darkness right now, unable to charge their phones, unable to get reliable information, unable to know if help is coming. I spoke briefly by phone with a man named David in Seattle before we lost the connection. He told me his entire neighborhood went dark around 4:30. He could see fires burning near the port. He said the most frightening thing wasn't the distant sounds of fighting. It was the silence after his phone died, the sense of being completely cut off.
We have an update from the White House. Press Secretary Michelle Kowalski issued a statement approximately 8 minutes ago. I'm going to read this in full. Quote, "The United States of America is under coordinated military attack by hostile foreign powers. The President has authorized the full mobilization of our armed forces. All military personnel are ordered to report immediately to their duty stations. The National Guard has been activated in all 50 states. We are in contact with our NATO allies and coalition partners. The American people should remain calm, follow local emergency instructions, and trust that our military and law enforcement are responding with full force to protect our homeland. Further updates will be provided as the situation develops." End quote. Sierra, the phrase "remain calm" is doing a lot of work in that statement.
It is, Alex. And I think most Americans hearing that are wondering how exactly they're supposed to remain calm when foreign troops are on American soil for the first time since the War of 1812. We're hearing from listeners who are trying to evacuate, trying to reach family members, trying to decide whether to stay or go. A listener named Patricia from Virginia Beach wrote to us saying the highways are completely jammed. She's been sitting in her car for over an hour, barely moving, watching her fuel gauge drop. She has her elderly mother with her. She's asking us where they should go, and Alex, we don't have an answer for her. Nobody does yet.
The Federal Aviation Administration has grounded all civilian aircraft nationwide. Every commercial flight currently in the air has been ordered to land at the nearest available airport. We're looking at the largest aviation shutdown since September 11th, 2001. Military aircraft are now the only planes authorized in American airspace. The Coast Guard has issued orders for all civilian vessels to return to port immediately or anchor in place. The borders with Canada and Mexico have been closed to non-essential traffic. We're effectively in a state of total lockdown while the military attempts to assess and respond to the threat. Early reports suggest the enemy has established beachheads in at least 7 locations along our coasts.
I want to read another message we received, this one from a woman who identified herself only as Sarah, somewhere in North Carolina. She writes, "I can hear jets overhead constantly. I don't know if they're ours or theirs. My husband is in the Army Reserve and he left 2 hours ago after getting the call. My daughter is 6 years old and she keeps asking me why Daddy had to leave, why she can't go to school tomorrow, why I'm crying. What am I supposed to tell her? How do I explain this? Sarah, if you're listening, I don't have perfect words for you, but tell your daughter that there are good people fighting to keep her safe, and that sometimes being brave means being scared and still holding on to each other."
We're now approximately 1 hour and 45 minutes into this crisis. The Department of Defense has confirmed that enemy forces have achieved limited territorial gains in several coastal areas. I want to be clear about what that means. We are not talking about symbolic attacks or raids. We are talking about foreign military forces occupying American territory, establishing defensive positions, and apparently preparing for sustained operations. The city of Virginia Beach has issued a mandatory evacuation order for all residents within 5 miles of the oceanfront. That's roughly 150,000 people being told to leave their homes immediately. Similar orders are being prepared for other coastal communities.
And those evacuation orders are creating cascading problems, Alex. We're hearing about hospitals that need to evacuate patients but don't have enough ambulances. We're hearing about nursing homes where elderly residents can't be moved quickly. There's a retirement community in Norfolk where staff members are trying to help dozens of people with limited mobility, and they're running out of time. A nurse there sent us a message begging for help, asking if anyone knows where they can get more vehicles, more personnel. These are the invisible casualties of war that don't make it into the initial reports. People who are vulnerable, who need help, who are going to be forgotten in the chaos unless we keep reminding everyone they exist.
The New York Stock Exchange suspended trading at 4:30 p.m., about 15 minutes after the first confirmed reports of the attacks. International markets are in free fall. We're seeing emergency sessions being called in capitals around the world. The United Nations Security Council is convening within the hour. NATO has announced that it's invoking Article 5, the collective defense provision, declaring that an attack on the United States constitutes an attack on all member nations. That means we're potentially looking at a global military response, though the logistics of that response, given the speed and scale of this attack, remain unclear.
I think what people at home need to understand, Alex, is that beyond all the geopolitical implications, beyond the military strategy and the international response, there are families right now who have no idea if they're going to survive the night. We received a video message, we can't broadcast it, but I've watched it, from a family in their basement in Seattle. 3 generations. Grandparents, parents, children. They're sitting there with flashlights because the power is out and you can hear booms in the distance. The mother is trying to smile for the kids, trying to make it seem like an adventure, like they're camping. But you can see the terror in her eyes. You can hear it in her voice when she thinks the camera isn't on her.
Let me provide an update on the military situation. The Pentagon has confirmed that all branches of the United States Armed Forces are engaged in active combat operations. The Navy is reporting that enemy naval vessels are operating off both coasts. The Air Force has confirmed multiple air superiority engagements, though they're not providing specific details on outcomes or losses. What we can say is that the scale of this assault suggests months, possibly years of planning. This was not an impulsive action. This was a carefully coordinated operation timed to strike multiple targets simultaneously and overwhelm our defensive capabilities in the crucial first hours.
We're also starting to hear reports of cyber attacks compounding the physical assault. Banking systems are experiencing outages. Several major telecommunications providers have reported network disruptions. Whether this is direct enemy action or simply infrastructure failing under the strain, the effect is the same. People can't access their money, can't make phone calls, can't reach loved ones. I've been trying to call my sister in Portland for the last hour and I can't get through. If I can't reach my family and I'm sitting here in a radio station with backup power and dedicated lines, imagine what regular people are going through.
We're receiving word that the President will address the nation again within the next 30 minutes. We'll bring you that address live as soon as it begins. In the meantime, state governors across the country are activating emergency response protocols. The governor of Virginia has declared a state of emergency and ordered all residents in coastal areas to evacuate inland immediately. The governor of Washington State has done the same. California's governor is expected to make a similar announcement momentarily. We're looking at the largest domestic population movement in American history. Millions of people simultaneously trying to reach safety, and our infrastructure was not designed to handle this kind of mass exodus.
There's a human cost to every one of those statistics you just mentioned, Alex. Millions of people evacuating means millions of individual stories of loss and fear. It means children being pulled out of school, elderly people being taken from the only homes they've known for decades, families making impossible choices about what to take and what to leave behind. How do you choose what to pack when you have 15 minutes to leave your house and you don't know if you'll ever come back? Do you take photo albums or food? Do you take heirlooms or medicine? These are the questions Americans are asking themselves right now, and there are no good answers.
Alex Mercer. We're now 2 hours and 20 minutes into this crisis. I'm looking at preliminary casualty figures that have just been released by the Department of Defense. And I need to warn listeners that these numbers are difficult to hear. The Pentagon is confirming at least 900 military personnel killed in action, with an additional 2,000 wounded. Civilian casualties are harder to verify at this stage, but local authorities are reporting numbers in the hundreds, possibly higher. These are Americans who were going about their normal lives this afternoon, who had no warning, who died in the opening minutes of this attack. We owe it to them and their families to be precise and respectful in how we report these numbers.
I'm going to read a message we just received from a woman named Jennifer in San Diego. She writes, "My husband was stationed at Naval Base San Diego. He called me at 4:20 and told me to take our son and drive east as far as we could go. He said he loved us. Then the line went dead. That was 2 hours ago and I haven't heard from him since. I'm in a gas station parking lot somewhere in the desert. My son is asleep in the back seat. I don't know where to go. I don't know if my husband is alive. I don't know what happens next. Jennifer, we don't have answers for you, but please know that you're not alone. There are thousands of military families in exactly your situation right now, and we're going to do everything we can to help you get information as soon as it becomes available."
The communications infrastructure damage is becoming clearer. Major fiber optic lines have been severed in multiple locations, likely through coordinated sabotage. Cell towers are overloaded with traffic, and many have lost power. The internet backbone is severely degraded. What this means practically is that large portions of the country are experiencing what amounts to a communications blackout. People in affected areas cannot call for help, cannot check on family members, cannot receive updated information about the situation. They are, in every meaningful sense, cut off from the outside world. This isolation is arguably as dangerous as the direct military threat because it prevents coordinated response and evacuation.
And that isolation breeds fear, Alex. When people don't have information, they fill the void with imagination, And right now, imaginations are running to the darkest possible places. We're seeing reports of panic buying at stores that still have power. Fights breaking out over gasoline, over bottled water, over basic supplies. A listener in Maryland described seeing people screaming at each other in a grocery store parking lot. This is what happens when the social contract starts to fray, when people become convinced that it's every family for themselves. We need leadership. We need clear communication. We need people to remember that we're all Americans and we survive this together or not at all.
The president is about to address the nation. We're going to take this live. Stand by. The president has concluded his address. For those who may have missed it, I'll summarize the key points. The president confirmed that the United States is under attack by a military coalition led by Russia, China, and North Korea, with additional support from what he termed hostile state and non-state actors. He has ordered a full military response and authorized commanders to use all necessary force to repel the invasion. He invoked emergency powers under the National Defense Authorization Act, effectively placing the country under martial law in affected regions. He called on Americans to remain strong, to follow instructions from military and law enforcement authorities, and to trust that we will prevail. He concluded by saying that American resolve has never been broken and will not be broken now.
Strong words from the president, but words aren't going to stop bullets or bombs. What people need right now is action, and I hope to God that action is coming. We're continuing to receive messages from listeners, and I have to tell you, Alex, they're getting more desperate. A man in Tacoma says he can see enemy helicopters flying over his neighborhood. A woman in Charleston says there are fires burning all over the city, and no fire trucks are coming. A teacher in Newport News says she's trapped in her school with 30 students and doesn't know how to get them home safely. These are Americans under attack on American soil, and they need help now.
The military situation continues to evolve rapidly. We're receiving reports of heavy fighting in and around Naval Station Norfolk, Joint Base Lewis McChord, and Naval Base San Diego. Enemy forces appear to have concentrated their initial assault on these major military installations, presumably to degrade our ability to project naval and air power. There are unconfirmed reports of enemy armor, actual tanks, being offloaded at captured port facilities in Virginia. If true, that would suggest the attacking forces came prepared for sustained ground combat, not just a quick raid. This has the hallmarks of an invasion force intending to hold territory.
Let me put that in perspective for anyone listening who might not fully grasp what Alex just said. Enemy tanks on American soil. Foreign soldiers establishing positions in American cities. This isn't a movie. This isn't a simulation. This is real, and it's happening right now. I grew up in this country believing we were untouchable, that wars happen somewhere else, to someone else. Every American my age or younger has lived their entire lives with that assumption. That assumption died today. Our children are going to grow up in a different America than the one we knew, assuming we get through this, and that breaks my heart.
We're now approaching the 3-hour mark since the initial attacks. Updated casualty figures from the Department of Defense put military deaths at approximately 1,200, with civilian deaths estimated at over 600, though that number is likely to rise significantly as reports continue to come in from affected areas. We're also receiving our first confirmed reports of American prisoners of war. The enemy has apparently overrun several smaller military facilities and captured personnel. Under the Geneva Conventions, those prisoners should be treated humanely. But given the nature of this attack, given the violations of international law already demonstrated, we have serious concerns about their welfare.
Every one of those prisoners is someone's child, someone's spouse, someone's parent. We received a message from a mother in Texas whose son is stationed at one of the facilities that went dark. She hasn't heard from him in 3 hours. She's asking us if we know anything, if we can find out anything. And we can't. We have no more information than she does. All we can tell her is that thousands of other families are in the same agonizing position, waiting, praying, hoping for word that may not come. This is the fog of war, and it's cruel beyond measure.
Transportation infrastructure is collapsing under the strain of mass evacuations. Interstate 64 in Virginia is at a complete standstill. Interstate 5 in Washington State is similarly gridlocked. Reports from California indicate all major highways heading inland are packed with vehicles moving at a crawl or not moving at all. People are running out of fuel. In some areas, evacuees have abandoned their vehicles and are continuing on foot. We're hearing about families with small children, elderly people, disabled individuals trying to walk along highways with whatever they can carry. The scenes are described as apocalyptic.
A listener named Marcus sent us photos from Interstate 64 outside Norfolk. I'm looking at them now, and they're heartbreaking. Cars, as far as you can see, barely moving. People sitting on their hoods because they've been stuck for hours. Children playing between the vehicles because there's nothing else to do. In one photo, you can see smoke rising in the distance, presumably from Norfolk. These people are trying to escape a war zone, but the escape routes themselves have become traps. If enemy forces decided to target these evacuation routes, the casualties would be catastrophic. They're completely exposed, completely vulnerable.
The military is attempting to establish defensive perimeters around major population centers. The Army has deployed units to protect Washington, D.C., New York City, and other critical urban areas. However, with simultaneous attacks occurring across such a wide geographic area, our forces are spread dangerously thin. The strategic reserve has been activated, but it takes time to mobilize and deploy those forces effectively. In the crucial first hours of this conflict, local commanders are making do with whatever assets they have immediately available, and in many cases, that's simply not enough to contain or repel the enemy advances.
I want to talk about the hospitals because this is critical. Hospitals in combat zones are being overwhelmed with casualties. We're hearing from emergency room doctors and nurses who are dealing with mass casualty events that their facilities were never designed to handle. A trauma surgeon in Norfolk sent us a message saying they've received over 300 patients in the last 2 hours. Everything from blast injuries to gunshot wounds to crush injuries from collapsed buildings. They're running out of blood, running out of supplies, running out of space. Medical personnel are making triage decisions that no one should ever have to make, choosing who gets treatment and who has to wait, knowing that waiting might mean dying.
The Red Cross has activated its disaster response protocols and is mobilizing resources. But like everything else, they're constrained by the scale and speed of this crisis. Blood banks are issuing urgent calls for donations in areas not directly affected by the fighting. If you're in a safe area and able to donate blood, please do so. The need is going to be immense and sustained. We're also seeing mutual aid networks forming spontaneously. Communities that aren't under direct attack are organizing to help evacuees, opening homes, schools, churches to provide shelter. It's important to note that amid all the chaos and fear, Americans are still helping Americans.
That's true, Alex, and I want to emphasize that because it's easy to focus only on the darkness. We're seeing acts of extraordinary courage and compassion. Teachers staying with students who can't get home. Neighbors helping elderly residents evacuate. Strangers pulling over on highways to share food, water, fuel with people who've run out. A listener named Rebecca in Richmond says her neighborhood has set up a coordination center in someone's living room, tracking who needs help, who can provide help, making sure no one is left behind. That's the America I know. That's the America that's going to get through this.
We're receiving an update from the Pentagon. I'm going to read this as it comes in. The Department of Defense confirms that United States forces have successfully repelled enemy attempts to advance beyond initial beachhead positions in multiple locations. Our forces have inflicted heavy casualties on the attacking forces and are holding defensive lines. However, The enemy maintains control of several key facilities and continues to receive reinforcements through air and sea. The situation remains critical and dynamic. All available forces are being committed to the defense of the homeland. That's the end of the statement.
Successfully repelled sounds positive until you realize it means there was heavy fighting on American soil, that people died, that we're still in a defensive position rather than having eliminated the threat entirely. I don't want to sound pessimistic, but I think we need to be realistic about what we're facing. This isn't going to be over in hours or even days. We're in the opening phase of what could be a prolonged conflict, and Americans need to prepare themselves mentally and emotionally for that reality.
We're now approximately 4 hours into this crisis. The sun is setting on the East Coast, and darkness is going to complicate both military operations and civilian evacuations significantly. Night vision technology gives our military an advantage, but it also provides cover for enemy infiltration and sabotage operations. We're advising civilians in affected areas to observe blackout procedures, to keep lights off, to avoid drawing attention to their locations. Local authorities are working with military commanders to establish curfews in areas near active combat zones.
The psychological impact of this, especially on children, is something we're going to be dealing with for years. A teacher named Amanda contacted us from a shelter in Maryland where she's helping care for dozens of children who were separated from their parents during evacuations. She says they're scared, confused, asking questions she doesn't know how to answer. Where are my parents? When can I go home? Why is this happening? She's doing her best to keep them calm, to make them feel safe, but she's terrified herself and struggling not to show it. These children's lives change forever today, and they don't even fully understand why.
International response continues to develop. The United Kingdom has announced it's deploying naval and air assets to support United States forces. France and Germany have issued similar commitments. However, the logistics of transiting forces across the Atlantic will take days at minimum. Japan has pledged support in the Pacific Theater. Australia is mobilizing. But the hard truth is that for the immediate future, American forces are largely on their own. Our allies want to help, but they're not here yet, and we need help now.
We're getting reports of vigils being held around the world, people gathering to show support for the United States, to pray for peace, to stand in solidarity with Americans under attack. That's meaningful, and I don't want to diminish it, but right now Americans need more than vigils. We need ammunition, we need medical supplies, we need reinforcements. The world's thoughts and prayers are appreciated, but they don't stop an invasion.
The economic implications are starting to become clear. The stock market will remain closed tomorrow. Banks are implementing emergency protocols to prevent runs. The Federal Reserve has announced unlimited liquidity support to keep the financial system functioning. But beyond the abstract economics, we're talking about real impacts on real people. ATMs aren't working in many areas. Credit card systems are down. People can't access their money even if stores are open, and many stores aren't open. We're looking at potential shortages of food, medicine, fuel in affected areas within days, if not hours.
A listener named Catherine in North Carolina raises an important point. She's a diabetic, and she's asking what happens to people like her who depend on regular medication. What happens when pharmacies close, when supply chains break down, when refrigeration fails and insulin spoils? What happens to people on dialysis when hospitals are overwhelmed with trauma patients? What happens to cancer patients in the middle of chemotherapy? These are life and death questions, and I don't know that anyone has good answers right now. The focus, understandably, is on the immediate military threat, but there are going to be cascading health crises that kill people just as surely as bullets and bombs.
We have an update on the situation in Virginia. State police are reporting that approximately 400,000 people are attempting to evacuate from the Norfolk, Virginia beach area. The highway system is completely overwhelmed. Authorities are opening contraflow lanes, using both sides of highways for outbound traffic only, but it's not enough. They're now discussing using military helicopters to evacuate critical cases, the injured, the very young, the very old. But helicopter capacity is limited, and most are committed to combat operations. The situation is described as dire.
400,000 people. That's not a statistic. That's 400,000 individual human beings, each with their own story, their own family, their own fears. That's a grandmother who survived World War II, now fleeing a war on American soil. That's a young couple with a newborn baby born just last week. That's a 10-year-old boy clutching his dog because he refused to leave without her. Every single one of those people woke up this morning thinking it would be a normal day, and now they're refugees in their own country.
We're now approximately 5 hours. It's crisis. Updated casualty figures show military deaths at approximately 1,800, with civilian deaths estimated to have surpassed 1,000. These numbers are still preliminary and likely undercount the true toll. Many areas remain inaccessible to emergency services. There are almost certainly people trapped in collapsed buildings, injured in areas without medical care, dying alone because help can't reach them. The full scope of the casualties won't be known for days or possibly weeks.
I need to take a moment here, Alex. I'm reading a message from a woman who was at a shopping mall in Virginia Beach when the attack started. She describes mass panic, people trampling each other trying to get out, security guards trying to maintain order while clearly terrified themselves. She saw a mother drop her child in the chaos and watched people step on the child trying to escape. She stopped to help, got the child to safety, but lost track of her own husband in the process. She's asking us if anyone has seen him, giving us his description, begging for help, and we can't help her. We have no way to help her. That feeling of helplessness is overwhelming.
The cyber warfare component continues to escalate. The Department of Homeland Security confirms that critical infrastructure systems have been targeted by sophisticated attacks. The power grid failures we mentioned earlier appear to be at least partially the result of deliberate sabotage via cyber attack. Water treatment facilities in several cities have been compromised. There are concerns about the safety of the water supply. Residents in affected areas are being advised to boil water before drinking or using it for cooking. This is the modern face of warfare, not just bombs and bullets, but attacks on the invisible systems that make modern life possible.
When the water stops running, when the lights don't turn on, when the most basic services we take for granted disappear, that's when you really understand how fragile our civilization is. We're all just a few days away from desperation if the systems fail. A listener in Seattle says his neighborhood has been without power for over 5 hours now. It's getting cold. People are starting to worry about food and refrigerators spoiling. Parents are trying to keep children warm. Elderly neighbors are checking on each other. They're coming together, but they're also scared about what happens if this goes on for days.
The military is establishing what they're calling protective zones around major cities, essentially creating defended perimeters beyond which civilian movement is restricted. This is necessary from a security standpoint, but it's also trapping people inside combat zones who might otherwise be able to evacuate. If you're inside one of these zones, authorities are advising you to shelter in place rather than attempt to move. Find the most secure location available. Basements are preferable. Gather supplies and wait for instructions. This goes against every human instinct to flee danger. But in this situation, movement could expose you to even greater risk.
Shelter in place. Such simple words for such a terrifying reality. You're telling people to hide in their homes while a war happens around them, to sit in the dark and hope that no stray munitions find them, that no enemy soldiers come through their doors, that their building doesn't collapse on top of them. And they're supposed to just wait, to trust that eventually someone will come to help them. The bravery that requires, the faith in institutions and fellow Americans that requires, it's immense.
We're getting reports from multiple sources that enemy forces are using civilian infrastructure as cover, positioning military assets near hospitals, schools, residential areas. This is a violation of the laws of war, but it's also a tactical challenge for our forces. Engaging enemy positions in these areas risks significant civilian casualties. Commanders are faced with impossible choices: accept greater risks to our troops to minimize civilian harm, or engage targets knowing civilians might be in the blast radius. There are no good options, only less terrible ones.
Sierra Lane. And every one of those decisions, whether to fire or hold fire, whether to risk our soldiers or risk civilians, that's a decision that someone has to live with forever. I don't envy the commanders making those calls, but I also think about the civilians being used as human shields. People in their own homes suddenly finding themselves in the middle of a battlefield through no choice of their own. They're victims twice over, first of the invasion and second of being made into tactical obstacles.
We're now 6 hours into this crisis. The initial shock is giving way to grim determination as both military and civilian responders settle in for what's clearly going to be a sustained emergency. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has activated its National Response Coordination Center and is working with state and local authorities to coordinate relief efforts. Emergency supplies are being moved into staging areas outside combat zones. The challenge is getting those supplies to the people who need them while fighting continues.
FEMA, the Red Cross, the Salvation Army, all these organizations are doing their best, but they were designed for hurricanes and earthquakes, natural disasters that don't shoot back. This is different. Relief workers trying to reach affected areas are at risk of being caught in combat. Supply convoys need military escorts. Refugee centers need to be established far enough from the fighting to be safe, but close enough to be accessible. It's an impossible logistics puzzle, and people are doing their best to solve it while under fire.
The President has authorized the activation of reserve components across all military branches. This means hundreds of thousands of Americans who serve part-time are being called to active duty. These are people with civilian jobs, families, normal lives, who are now being pulled away to fight. A listener who identified himself as James, a Navy reservist in Ohio, sent us a message saying he just got his activation orders. He's a high school teacher. He has 2 kids in elementary school. He never thought he'd actually have to deploy, especially not to defend American soil. But he's packing his gear and preparing to report.
James, if you're listening, thank you for your service, and please come home safe. And to James's family and all the families of service members being activated right now, please know that the entire nation is thinking of you, praying for you, grateful beyond words for your sacrifice. Your loved ones are standing between us and people who wish us harm. That's the most profound act of love and duty imaginable.
International condemnation of the attacks is universal from democratic nations, though response from authoritarian regimes has been notably muted, or in some cases supportive of the attacking coalition. The United Nations General Assembly has called an emergency session. There are discussions of unprecedented economic sanctions against the attacking nations, though the practical effect of sanctions during active warfare is questionable. What matters now is military support, and that's beginning to materialize, but not yet in decisive quantities.
Words and resolutions don't stop invasions. The international community can condemn this all they want, but until Allied troops and equipment arrive in meaningful numbers, we're largely on our own. I don't mean to sound ungrateful for the support we're receiving, but I'm frustrated by the gap between expressions of support and actual boots on the ground, actual planes in the sky, actual ships in the water helping us fight.
We're receiving reports of resistance activities in areas under enemy occupation. These are unconfirmed at this stage, but there are accounts of American civilians conducting sabotage operations, harassing enemy forces, providing intelligence to our military. This kind of partisan activity is incredibly dangerous, and military authorities are advising civilians not to engage in combat operations, to leave the fighting to trained military personnel. However, it's also very American to resist occupation, to refuse to submit to foreign control.
I understand the instinct to fight back, to do something rather than submit, but I also worry about civilians getting themselves killed engaging in amateur guerrilla warfare. A hunting rifle and patriotic fervor are not adequate preparation for combat against professional soldiers. People need to be smart about this. If you're in occupied territory, the most important thing is to survive, to take care of your family, to live to see liberation. Don't throw your life away on a gesture that accomplishes nothing except making you a casualty.
That said, information gathering and reporting is something civilians can do relatively safely. If you see enemy movements, positions, or activities, and you can communicate that information to military authorities through whatever channels are available, that's valuable intelligence that helps our forces plan operations. Just be careful. Don't take unnecessary risks. Don't make yourself a target. Your life has value beyond any tactical contribution you might make.
We're coming up on 7 hours now. 7 hours since the world changed. 7 hours since America lost its innocence in a way we haven't experienced since Pearl Harbor. I keep thinking about how this morning people were worried about normal things. Traffic, work deadlines, whether they remembered to pack their kids' lunch. And now those same people are worried about survival, about whether they'll live through the night, about whether they'll ever see their homes again. The whiplash of that is almost incomprehensible.
The scale of the displacement is becoming clearer. Early estimates suggest that upwards of 5 million Americans have been displaced from their homes, either through mandatory evacuations or because their homes are in active combat zones. That's the largest refugee crisis in American history, and we're dealing with it while simultaneously fighting a war. Shelter capacity in receiving areas is already strained. Schools, churches, community centers are being converted into emergency housing, but it's not enough. People are sleeping in cars, in parking lots, anywhere they can find space.
5 million refugees in America. Our country has spent decades responding to refugee crises in other parts of the world, and now we are the crisis. Now we're the people fleeing with whatever we can carry, hoping someone will take us in, provide shelter, food, safety. It's a perspective shift that I think a lot of Americans are struggling to process. We're used to being the helpers, not the ones needing help.
Let me provide an update on the military situation as we understand it at this hour. Enemy forces have established what appear to be semi-permanent positions in approximately 15 to 20 locations along our coasts. The largest concentrations are around the military facilities they initially targeted. Our forces have contained these positions, but have not yet been able to dislodge them completely. Both sides have taken significant casualties. The enemy appears to be digging in for sustained operations rather than attempting to push inland immediately. This suggests they believe they can hold these positions, which is deeply concerning.
Sierra Lane. If they're digging in, that means they came prepared for a long fight. That means they have supply lines established, reinforcements coming, a plan for sustainment. This wasn't a raid or a demonstration. This is an occupation force. And that changes everything about how we have to think about the timeline for resolving this. We're not talking about repelling an attack. We're talking about liberating occupied American territory.
The Air Force reports achieving air superiority over most of the continental United States, which is crucial. It means enemy aircraft are unable to operate freely, which limits their ability to support ground forces or conduct strikes against our infrastructure. However, achieving air superiority and maintaining it are different things. The enemy has surface-to-air missile systems in occupied areas. They have air defense capabilities. Every mission our pilots fly is dangerous, and we're losing aircraft and crews. The airspace is contested, even if we're winning that contest.
Every aircraft lost is a crew lost, and every crew member is someone's child, someone's spouse, someone's parent. We're asking these young men and women to fly into danger repeatedly, knowing that some of them won't come back. A listener who identified herself as a military mother says her son is an Air Force pilot and she hasn't heard from him since the attack started. She's going out of her mind with worry, but she's also proud because she knows what he's doing, knows that he's fighting to protect all of us. To all the military families listening, your strength humbles me.
We're now approximately 8 hours into this crisis. It's fully dark across the eastern United States. The blackouts in affected areas mean cities that should be glowing with light are dark. Satellite imagery shows vast stretches of the East Coast in complete darkness. It's eerie and unsettling. This is what war looks like from space. Darkness where there should be light. Fires burning where there should be peace. A nation under attack visible from orbit.
The darkness is terrifying for people on the ground. Humans are instinctively afraid of the dark, and when you add the sounds of distant explosions, gunfire, aircraft overhead, that primal fear becomes overwhelming. A listener named Maria in Norfolk says she's sitting in her bathtub with her children because bathrooms are often the most structurally sound part of a house. They can hear fighting a few miles away. The children are crying, she's singing to them, trying to keep them calm, but she's terrified. She asked us to say her name on air so that if something happens, people will know they existed. Maria, you exist. Your children exist. We see you.
The military is using darkness to conduct counterattack operations in some areas. Night vision technology gives our forces a significant advantage in darkness. We're receiving reports of special operations forces conducting raids on enemy positions, disrupting their attempts to consolidate control, rescuing trapped American personnel. These are dangerous operations conducted by elite units, and they're having an effect. But it's slow, incremental progress against an entrenched enemy.
I want to talk about the medical personnel, the doctors and nurses and paramedics who are working around the clock to save lives. These people are heroes in the truest sense. They're working in impossible conditions, without adequate supplies, often under fire, treating horrific injuries, watching people die despite their best efforts. A trauma nurse in Virginia Beach sent us a message earlier. She's been on shift for 8 hours straight. She's covered in blood. She's exhausted. But she says she can't stop, won't stop, because people keep coming in and they need her. That's dedication beyond measure.
The psychological toll on medical personnel in these situations is immense and often underestimated. They're trained to save lives, and they're being forced to watch people die because there aren't enough resources, enough time, enough hands. That kind of moral injury, the trauma of not being able to do enough, it stays with people for life. We're creating a generation of healthcare workers who are going to carry these scars forever, and we need to recognize that and prepare to support them in the aftermath.
Assuming there is an aftermath, assuming we get through this. I don't want to be defeatist, but I think we have to acknowledge the possibility that life as we knew it may be over, that we're entering a fundamentally different era. Even if we repel this invasion, even if we win militarily, the America that emerges from this is going to be changed in ways we can't yet fully comprehend. We've lost our sense of invulnerability. We've lost our innocence. We can never get those back.
We're receiving word that the president will address the nation again shortly. This will be his third address since the attacks began. The frequency of presidential communication in the early hours of a crisis like this is important for maintaining public morale and providing updated information. We'll bring you that address as soon as it begins. In the meantime, authorities continue to urge calm and compliance with evacuation orders where issued.
I want to read another listener message. This one is from a woman named Susan in Seattle. She writes, I'm a widow. My husband died 2 years ago. I have no children. I'm 68 years old. I evacuated because I was told to, but honestly, I'm not sure why I'm bothering. If this is the end, what difference does it make whether I die at home or in some refugee shelter? I'm tired. I'm scared. I'm alone. Susan, please don't give up. Your life has value. The people around you, even if they're strangers, they need you. Your experience, your strength, your survival. Please hold on.
The economic disruption is cascading through systems in complex ways. Gas stations are running dry as people evacuate. Supply trucks can't get through because roads are blocked. Even in areas not directly affected by fighting, shortages are beginning to develop because the logistics network has been shattered. The just-in-time delivery system that keeps American stores stocked is predicated on stable transportation infrastructure, and we no longer have that. Within days, we could see shortages of food, medicine, and basic supplies even in areas far from combat.
People are going to start making desperate decisions when they can't feed their children, when they can't get medicine they need to survive. We could see looting, violence, a breakdown of civil order in areas that aren't even under direct attack. Fear and scarcity are a dangerous combination. Communities need to come together, share resources, look out for each other. The alternative is a descent into chaos that could be almost as destructive as the invasion itself.
Law enforcement agencies are already stretched thin, dealing with evacuation traffic control, securing vulnerable infrastructure, and responding to the inevitable uptick in crime that occurs during disasters. Police officers are human too. They have families they're worried about. Some of them are in affected areas themselves. They're doing their jobs while dealing with the same fear and uncertainty as everyone else. We're asking a lot of our first responders, and they're rising to the challenge. But there are limits to what they can do.
A police officer in Virginia who asked that we not use his name sent us a message describing what it's like trying to maintain order during an evacuation while hearing explosions in the distance and not knowing if his own family is safe. He said every instinct tells him to go find his wife and kids, to protect them, but his duty is to help strangers evacuate. The conflict between duty and family is tearing him apart. I can't imagine the strength it takes to stay at your post in those circumstances.
We're now 9 hours into this crisis. The president is beginning his address. We're going live. The president has concluded his second evening address. Key points. He announced that Allied forces from the United Kingdom and Canada are en route and will begin arriving within 24 hours. He confirmed that our military has successfully prevented enemy forces from advancing beyond their initial beachheads in most locations, though fighting remains intense. He acknowledged the civilian casualties and displacement, expressing condolences to affected families. He announced the activation of strategic petroleum reserves to address fuel shortages and directed FEMA to establish large-scale refugee processing centers. He concluded with a call for national unity and resilience.
Allied forces arriving tomorrow is good news, assuming they can actually get here safely. The Atlantic and Pacific are contested waters right now. Enemy naval forces are active. The crossing is going to be dangerous. But we need those reinforcements desperately. Our military is performing incredibly well given the circumstances, but they're outnumbered in key areas and they've been fighting for 9 hours straight. People are exhausted. Equipment is breaking down. We need fresh troops and new equipment if we're going to transition from defense to offense.
The mention of strategic petroleum reserves is significant. Fuel is going to become a critical resource if this conflict extends beyond a few days. Military operations consume enormous quantities of fuel. Civilian evacuations require fuel. Emergency generators require fuel. The president is trying to head off a potential crisis before it develops. But it's an acknowledgement that we're looking at sustained conflict, not a brief emergency.
We're heading into the first night of this crisis, and I think people need to prepare themselves for a very long, very difficult night. It's dark. It's cold in many areas. People are scared. Children are asking questions parents can't answer. Families are separated, and the fighting is continuing. The enemy doesn't sleep. and neither can our defenders. Everyone on the front lines, military and civilian, they're going to have to find reserves of strength they didn't know they had.
We're receiving reports of extraordinary acts of heroism from the first hours of the fighting. A Coast Guard crew in Virginia apparently rescued over 200 civilians from a beach under active enemy fire, making multiple trips while being shot at, refusing to leave anyone behind. An Air Force pilot whose aircraft was hit managed to crash land in a parking lot rather than ejecting, which would have sent his disabled plane into a residential neighborhood. He died in the crash, but saved dozens of people on the ground. These stories need to be told and remembered.
That pilot died saving people who will never know his name, never know that they owe their lives to his sacrifice. That's heroism in its purest form. Acting not for glory or recognition, but simply because it's the right thing to do. We're seeing that kind of courage everywhere today, from military personnel, from first responders, from ordinary civilians who are stepping up in impossible situations. It's the best of America shining through the worst of circumstances.
Casualty numbers continue to climb. The latest figures from the Department of Defense show approximately 2,200 military deaths and an estimated 1,400 civilian deaths. Though again, these numbers are almost certainly undercounts given the difficulty of accessing many affected areas. We're also seeing our first reports of wounded personnel arriving at hospitals outside combat zones. Medical facilities in Maryland, Pennsylvania, and North Carolina are receiving evacuated casualties.
Every one of those wounded is a life disrupted, a person who woke up healthy this morning and who is now dealing with injuries that may affect them for the rest of their lives. Amputations, burns, traumatic brain injuries, wounds that will require years of recovery and therapy. And those are the physical wounds, the psychological wounds, the trauma of combat, of seeing death, of being in fear for your life. Those wounds are invisible, but just as real and just as lasting.
We're approximately 10 hours into this crisis. I need to provide an update on the situation in the Pacific Northwest. Reports from Joint Base Lewis McChord indicate that enemy forces launched a major assault approximately 2 hours ago, attempting to break out of their initial perimeter. United States forces repelled the assault, but took significant casualties. The enemy appears to be testing our defenses, probing for weaknesses. This pattern is likely to repeat at other occupied positions.
Every one of those probing attacks costs lives. Our soldiers are being asked to hold ground against an enemy that has numerical superiority in specific locations. They're being asked to stand and fight, and they're doing it, but the cost is terrible. A listener whose brother is stationed at Lewis McChord says she hasn't heard from him in hours and she's terrified. She wants to know if anyone has information, and we don't. We have no way to get individual status updates for the thousands of service members engaged in combat.
The military has established a family notification system for casualties, but it's overwhelmed by the volume. Families may not receive official notification for hours or even days after a loss. This means thousands of people are sitting in terrible uncertainty, not knowing if their loved ones are alive or dead. It's a cruel limbo, and there's no way to avoid it given the scale of what's happening. The system is doing the best it can, but it's inadequate to the moment.
I can't imagine waiting for that knock on the door, that phone call, that official notification that your worst fear has come true. Every hour of not knowing is torture. Every time the phone rings, your heart stops. Every vehicle that slows down near your house, you think, this is it. This is when I find out. And for some families, the notification is coming. For some families, their loved one is already gone and they just don't know it yet. The grief that's coming, the magnitude of loss this nation is about to absorb, it's staggering.
International markets are in absolute chaos. Asian markets that opened during our evening hours fell by unprecedented amounts before trading was halted. The economic implications of this attack extend far beyond the United States. Global supply chains are disrupted. International trade has essentially stopped as nations divert shipping away from combat zones. The uncertainty alone is enough to trigger a worldwide recession, possibly worse. But right now, economics seem almost trivial compared to the human cost.
Money doesn't matter when you're running for your life. Stock prices don't matter when you're sitting in a shelter wondering if you'll ever see your home again. I understand that economic collapse creates its own humanitarian crises, that it matters in the long run, but right now, in this moment, the only thing that matters is survival. Everything else is an abstraction.
We're receiving reports of sporadic enemy activity in areas that were not part of the initial assault wave. There are unconfirmed accounts of enemy special forces or sabotage teams operating in interior states, targeting infrastructure and spreading chaos. The military is investigating these reports, but they're also dealing with false alarms, panicked civilians seeing threats where none exist. The fog of war creates confusion that's almost as damaging as actual attacks.
People are terrified, and terrified people see threats everywhere. A listener in Kansas says someone in her neighborhood reported seeing paratroopers, and within minutes there were dozens of people calling 911, loading guns, preparing to defend themselves against an enemy force that turned out to be kids with model parachutes. False alarms tie up emergency services and create panic for no reason. People need to stay calm, verify information before spreading it, trust official sources.
That said, there is legitimate concern about infiltration by enemy agents or special operations forces. The borders are long and porous. Our attention is focused on coastal areas. It would be relatively easy for small teams to penetrate into the interior and conduct sabotage operations. Authorities are right to investigate reports seriously, even if most turn out to be false alarms. The challenge is balancing vigilance with avoiding panic.
We're 11 hours in now. 11 hours of constant stress, constant fear, constant bad news. People are exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. There's only so much trauma the human mind can absorb before it starts to shut down. We're asking people to remain alert, to follow instructions, to make critical decisions, but we're asking that of people who are running on adrenaline and terror. At some point, people are going to start making mistakes simply because they're too overwhelmed to function normally.
Sleep is going to be a challenge for millions of Americans tonight. How do you sleep when there's a war happening? How do you close your eyes when you don't know what you're going to wake up to? People in combat zones aren't going to sleep at all. People in evacuation shelters are going to try to sleep on hard floors in crowded rooms with strangers. Even people in safe areas are going to lie awake, checking their phones, watching the news, unable to shut off their anxiety.
A mother in Maryland wrote to us asking if she should give her children sleeping pills to help them rest. She says they're hysterical, exhausted, but unable to sleep because they're so scared. I'm not a doctor, and I can't give medical advice, but what I can say is that children take their emotional cues from their parents. If you can project calm, even if you're faking it, even if you're terrified inside, that helps them. Hold them. Tell them you love them. Tell them that good people are fighting to keep them safe. And yes, if a doctor says medication is appropriate, there's no shame in that.
FEMA has established its first large-scale emergency shelters in Pennsylvania and Maryland. These are facilities capable of housing thousands of people with food service, medical care, and basic amenities. Buses are being organized to transport evacuees from overflow areas to these shelters. It's a massive logistical undertaking, and it's happening in real time with minimal planning. People are working miracles to make this happen, but it's still going to be chaotic and insufficient for the numbers we're dealing with.
Shelters are better than nothing, but let's be honest about what they are. They're warehouses full of terrified people who've lost everything. They're cramped and loud and uncomfortable. Privacy is non-existent. The food is institutional. Children are crying constantly. Sick people are coughing. Everyone is stressed, and some people handle stress by being angry, by lashing out. Shelter staff are going to be dealing with conflicts, with mental health crises. with all the dysfunction that comes from putting traumatized people in close quarters.
That's true. But it's also important to note that many people in shelters are helping each other, forming impromptu communities, sharing resources and skills. Humans are social creatures. We're capable of great compassion, especially during shared hardship. A shelter worker in Maryland reported that volunteers are already emerging from among the evacuees themselves, people who are stepping up to help cook, clean, care for children, provide comfort. That's the resilience of the human spirit showing itself.
You're right, and I don't want to be entirely negative. I've seen the photos from some of these shelters, and yes, there's sadness and exhaustion, but there's also people helping each other, comforting each other, holding each other up. That's what's going to get us through this. Not just military might or government response, but ordinary people choosing to be kind in a cruel situation, choosing to help in a helpless situation.
We're now approximately 12 hours into this crisis. We're at the halfway point of the first day, though calling it a day feels wrong because this is a continuous event without clear boundaries. The fighting hasn't stopped. The evacuations haven't stopped. The dying hasn't stopped. Time is marked by gradually accumulating casualties and gradually increasing desperation, rather than by the normal rhythms of day and night.
12 hours ago, America was at peace. 12 hours ago, we were arguing about politics and sports and all the trivial things that seemed so important yesterday and seem so meaningless now. 12 hours ago, we were a different country, and we can never go back to being that country again. This is a before and after moment in history, and we're living through the after.
The military situation has stabilized somewhat, which is both good and bad news. Good because it means our forces have successfully contained the initial assault and prevented deeper penetration. Bad because stabilization means we've reached a stalemate, with enemy forces dug into positions we can't immediately dislodge without unacceptable casualties. Breaking a siege is costly. Urban warfare is the most difficult and dangerous kind of combat. We're facing a grinding, bloody campaign to retake occupied territory.
And every day that campaign takes is another day of people living under occupation, another day of families separated, another day of casualties mounting. We need to retake that territory, but we also need to do it in a way that doesn't destroy the cities we're trying to liberate, that doesn't kill the civilians we're trying to save. It's an almost impossible balance, and I don't envy the commanders who have to strike it.
We're receiving our first reports of conditions in occupied areas, information smuggled out by various means. The picture is grim. Enemy forces are conducting house-to-house searches, confiscating weapons and communications equipment, rounding up military-age males. There are reports of summary executions of anyone suspected of resistance. These reports are difficult to verify, but are consistent with the behavior we'd expect from the attacking coalition, based on their documented conduct in other conflicts.
Americans are being executed on American soil by foreign soldiers. Let that sink in. This isn't hyperbole or worst-case speculation. This is happening right now, and we need to face that reality clearly. People we might have gone to school with, worked with, people who are our neighbors and fellow citizens, they're being murdered because they refuse to submit or because they were suspected of defiance. The rage I feel is overwhelming.
Rage is understandable, but it needs to be channeled productively. The best way to help people in occupied territories is to support the military effort to liberate them, to donate to relief organizations, to provide for refugees, to maintain the social cohesion that's going to be necessary to see this through. Rage that leads to recklessness, to vigilante action, to attacks on people who look like they might be from the attacking nations. That rage is destructive, and we need to guard against it.
You're absolutely right, Alex. I'm not advocating for vigilantism or hate crimes. But I also think it's important to acknowledge the anger that people are feeling, the desire for revenge, for justice. Those feelings are real and valid. What we do with those feelings, how we channel them, that's what separates civilization from barbarism. We need to be better than the people who attacked us, even as we fight them with everything we have.
The Air Force has conducted its first strategic bombing runs against enemy positions in occupied territories. These were precision strikes using guided munitions, targeting command and control facilities, ammunition depots, and heavy weapons positions. The goal is to degrade enemy capabilities while minimizing civilian casualties. Early reports suggest the strikes were successful, but we've also received reports of civilian injuries. War is imprecise even when we try our hardest to be precise.
Precision-guided munitions are wonderful technology until you're the civilian who happens to be near the target. Until you're the family whose house was 50 meters too close to an ammunition dump. I'm not criticizing the military. They're doing what they have to do. But we need to remember that our strikes, even necessary strikes, even justified strikes, they create victims too. Civilian casualties are tragic regardless of which side causes them.
We're approaching 13 hours into this crisis. Sunrise on the East Coast is still several hours away. The second night of fighting is going to be as difficult as the first. Our forces have had time to rest in some areas, to rotate fresh troops into the line, but they're still dealing with an enemy that's well-equipped, well-trained, and highly motivated. This isn't going to be a quick victory. This is going to require sustained effort over days, possibly weeks.
Weeks. The thought of this going on for weeks is almost unbearable. But you're right. We need to prepare ourselves mentally for a long fight. This isn't going to be over tomorrow or the next day. We're in this for the duration, however long that turns out to be. And that means we need to pace ourselves, emotionally and physically. We need to find ways to sustain hope and resilience when everything feels hopeless.
One way to maintain morale is to focus on what we can control. We can't stop the war single-handedly, but we can help our neighbors. We can donate blood. We can volunteer at shelters. We can check on elderly people in our communities. We can share accurate information and counter rumors. Small acts of kindness and civic responsibility, multiplied across millions of people, those add up to something meaningful.
Alex is right, and I want to echo that call to action. If you're in a safe area, if you have resources to spare, please help. Donate to the Red Cross, to local relief organizations, to food banks. If you have extra room in your home, consider hosting evacuees. If you have time, volunteer. If you have skills, medical training, construction experience, logistics knowledge, offer them. We're going to rebuild from this, and we're going to need everyone working together to do it.
The challenges extend beyond the immediate crisis. We're looking at long-term displacement for potentially millions of people. Even after the fighting ends, even after territories are liberated, it's going to take months or years to rebuild damaged infrastructure, to clear unexploded ordnance, to make areas safe for habitation. Some people may never be able to return to their homes. That's a hard truth we need to face.
Imagine being told you can never go home, that the house you raised your children in is gone or contaminated, or in a zone that's too dangerous to inhabit, that your entire community is scattered, that the life you built is just over. How do you even begin to process that kind of loss? How do you start over when you've lost everything?
People do it because they have to. Humans are remarkably adaptable. We've seen it in every war, every natural disaster, every catastrophe in history. People find a way to keep going because the alternative is to give up. And most people won't do that, especially when they have children or other dependents counting on them. The resilience of the human spirit is extraordinary, even if the cost of that resilience is measured in trauma and grief.
Sierra Lane. We're hearing from more listeners, and the messages are becoming harder to read. People are losing hope. They're asking if we're going to survive this, if America's going to survive this. And I want to say clearly and unequivocally, yes, we will survive this. It's going to be hard. It's going to cost us dearly, but we will survive and we will rebuild because that's what Americans do. We've faced existential threats before and we've overcome them. This is no different.
The historical parallel that keeps coming to mind is Pearl Harbor. Sudden attack, massive casualties, territory lost, fleet damaged. But we came back from that. We mobilized, we fought, we won. This is worse in some ways because the fighting is on the mainland, because civilians are directly in the line of fire. But the principle is the same. We've been hurt, but we're not defeated. The enemy has won battles, but they haven't won the war.
Pearl Harbor led to over 3 years of brutal warfare before victory. I hope this doesn't take that long, but we need to be realistic. Even with Allied support, even with our superior resources, dislodging an entrenched enemy is difficult. We need to prepare for a long war, and that means preparing our society, our economy, our infrastructure for sustained conflict. We're going to need rationing, conscription, conversion of civilian industry to military production. Total war.
The economic mobilization is already beginning. The president has invoked emergency powers to redirect industrial production. Automobile factories are being retasked to produce military vehicles. Technology companies are being contracted to produce communications equipment and drones. Chemical plants are increasing production of munitions. It's reminiscent of World War II, the rapid transformation of a peacetime economy into a war machine. We have the capacity. The question is whether we have the will and the time.
We have the will. I don't doubt that for a second. Americans are angry, we're scared, but we're united in a way we haven't been in decades. All the political divisions that seemed so important yesterday, they've evaporated in the face of this common threat. We're not Democrats or Republicans right now. We're Americans, and we're under attack, and we're going to fight together.
We're now 14 hours into this crisis. The latest casualty figures show military deaths at approximately 2,700, with civilian deaths estimated at 1,900. Those numbers will continue to rise. We're also receiving the first reports of American prisoners of war being paraded in propaganda videos by the enemy. These videos show captured American service members, clearly under duress, making statements that are obviously coerced. This is a violation of the Geneva Conventions, and it's deeply disturbing.
Seeing our people captured, humiliated, used for propaganda, it's enraging and heartbreaking. Those are someone's children, someone's spouses. Their families are watching those videos and experiencing unimaginable anguish. To the families of POWs, please know that our government is doing everything possible to secure their release, and the international community is demanding that they be treated humanely. Hold on to hope.
The treatment of prisoners of war is going to be a major concern going forward. Based on the attacking coalition's historical record, we have reason to fear that American POWs will not be treated in accordance with international law. Torture, forced labor, summary execution. These are all possibilities. The military is prioritizing intelligence gathering on POW locations with an eye toward possible rescue operations. But those operations are extremely dangerous, and the chances of success are uncertain.
Every parent of a service member is terrified right now that their child could become a POW. It's a fate that in some ways seems worse than death, because it means prolonged suffering, uncertainty, helplessness. We need to remember these prisoners, advocate for them, demand their humane treatment, and work toward their liberation. They're not forgotten. They're very much on our minds and in our hearts.
The international response continues to develop. The European Union has announced a comprehensive sanctions package against the attacking nations, though as mentioned earlier, the practical effect of sanctions during active warfare is limited. More significantly, several European nations have pledged combat forces to support American defense. French and German units are preparing to deploy. Poland has offered air and ground forces. The British are already en route. This is shaping up to be a truly global conflict.
The support is appreciated, but I also worry about the escalation. If this becomes a global war, if it spreads beyond American territory, we're looking at unprecedented devastation, millions of casualties, economic collapse, possibly the use of nuclear weapons. The stakes couldn't be higher, and I hope that cooler heads prevail, that this can be contained and resolved without spiraling into total global war.
The nuclear dimension is the elephant in the room that we haven't directly addressed yet. Multiple nations involved in this conflict have nuclear arsenals. The use of nuclear weapons, even tactical nuclear weapons, would represent a catastrophic escalation. Military analysts are confident that all sides understand this, that the principle of mutually assured destruction still holds. But the danger exists, and we need to acknowledge it.
I don't even want to think about nuclear weapons being used. The thought is too terrible. But you're right that we need to acknowledge the possibility. If you're listening and you're terrified about nuclear war, all I can say is that every indication suggests all parties understand that nuclear exchange would be civilization ending and are therefore strongly motivated to avoid it. It's cold comfort, but it's the truth as we understand it.
We're receiving reports that Allied forces from Canada have begun crossing the border to reinforce American positions in the Pacific Northwest. Canadian Army units are moving south to support the defense of Seattle and the containment of enemy forces around Joint Base Lewis-McChord. This is the first arrival of Allied ground forces, and it's a significant morale boost for our troops in that sector.
Thank God for our allies. Thank God for nations and people who honor their commitments, who stand with us in our darkest hour. The Canadians are sending their sons and daughters to fight and possibly die on American soil to help defend us. That's friendship and alliance in the most profound sense. We owe them a debt we can never fully repay.
We're now 15 hours into this crisis. We've been on the air continuously for the entire duration, and we're going to continue as long as we're able. This is the most important story of our lifetimes, and we're committed to keeping you informed, to being a voice of calm and reason in the chaos, to honoring those who are suffering and fighting and dying.
Alex and I are going to stay here at these microphones for as long as we're needed. This is what we do. This is our contribution to the national effort. We can't fire a gun or treat wounded soldiers, but we can provide information and comfort and a sense of connection. If you're listening, wherever you are, please know that you're not alone. Millions of Americans are listening to the same broadcast, sharing the same fear, holding on to the same hope.
The next several hours are going to be critical. Dawn is approaching on the East Coast. We'll be able to assess damage more clearly. Military operations will intensify. The full scale of the catastrophe will become more apparent. I'm not going to lie to you and say it's going to be easy to hear, but we'll get through it together, 1 hour at a time, one piece of news at a time.
We've been getting questions about when normalcy will return, when schools will reopen, when people can go back to work, when life will be normal again. And the honest answer is, not for a long time. We're in a national emergency that's going to last weeks at minimum, possibly months. Schools in affected areas will not reopen until the fighting stops and areas are secured. Most businesses are going to remain closed. The economy is effectively on pause in combat zones. People need to prepare for sustained disruption.
That sustained disruption is going to create hardship beyond the immediate threat of violence. People need income to survive. Mortgages and rent don't pause during a war. People need food, medicine, basic necessities, and those things cost money. The government is going to need to implement emergency economic support programs, direct payments to displaced people, suspension of debt obligations, rent and mortgage freezes. Without that, we're going to see a humanitarian crisis on top of the military crisis.
Congress is apparently working on an emergency relief bill, though obviously normal legislative procedures are out the window. We're in a crisis mode where the president has extraordinary powers and can act without normal congressional oversight. That's necessary given the urgency, but it's also concerning from a democratic standpoint. We're trading liberty for security in ways that should make us uncomfortable, even if we understand why it's happening.
The balance between security and liberty is always fraught during wartime. We saw it during World War II with Japanese internment, during the Civil War with suspension of habeas corpus, during the Revolution with loyalty oaths and property confiscation. History will judge how we handle this balance, whether we maintained our values or betrayed them in pursuit of victory. Right now, in the crisis, it's hard to have perspective, but it's important to try.
I think the most important thing is to remember that the enemy isn't our fellow Americans, even Americans who look like they might be from the attacking nations. We can't let this turn into an excuse for racism or xenophobia. We can't start interning people based on ethnicity or ancestry. That would be a betrayal of everything America stands for. We have to be better than that. Even now, especially now.
Absolutely agreed. There are already concerning reports of harassment and violence directed at Asian Americans in some communities. This is unacceptable and counterproductive. Asian Americans are Americans, full stop. Many are serving in our military right now, fighting to defend this country. Attacking them is not patriotism, it's bigotry, and it needs to stop immediately.
We're 16 hours in now, moving into the early morning hours. I'm exhausted, and I know Alex is too, and I know everyone listening is emotionally drained. But we have to keep going. Dawn is coming, and with it a clearer picture of what we're facing. We'll get through this night. We'll see the sun rise on a changed America, but still America, still home.
The military is preparing for what they anticipate will be major combat operations at first light. Darkness has limited what our forces can do. With daylight comes the ability to bring the full weight of American military power to bear on enemy positions. Air support, artillery, armor, all the tools of conventional warfare that work best in daylight. We should expect heavy fighting throughout the day tomorrow.
More fighting means more casualties, more death, more families destroyed. I hate that we're talking about it in such abstract terms, but I don't know how else to process it. If I thought too hard about each individual death, about each family receiving notification, I couldn't function. So I have to stay somewhat detached, somewhat analytical. It's a defense mechanism, and I'm not proud of it, but it's how I'm coping.
That's entirely human and understandable, Sierra. We're all coping in our own ways. Some people need to stay busy, to focus on practical tasks. Some people need to talk, to process verbally. Some people need to withdraw, to protect themselves emotionally. There's no right way to handle trauma of this magnitude. We just do our best to survive it psychologically and emotionally.
A listener asked if we have psychologists or counselors available to talk to people who are struggling. The National Suicide Prevention Lifeline and the Crisis Text Line are still operating, though experiencing heavy volume. If you're in crisis, if you're thinking about harming yourself, please reach out. Please talk to someone. Your life matters. We need you to get through this.
Mental health is going to be a massive challenge in the weeks and months ahead. We're creating a traumatized population of millions of people who are going to need support, therapy, treatment for PTSD, depression, anxiety. The mental health infrastructure was already inadequate before this crisis. It's going to be overwhelmed. We need to start planning now for how we're going to help people heal psychologically from this catastrophe.
I keep thinking about the children, how this is going to affect them for the rest of their lives. Children who are experiencing this trauma at young ages, who are watching their parents terrified, who are fleeing their homes, who are seeing death and destruction. The long-term psychological impact is going to be profound. We're going to have a generation marked by this, the way the Great Depression marked a generation, the way World War II marked a generation.
We're now 17 hours into this crisis. I want to provide an update on the infrastructure situation. Power grid repairs are beginning in some areas, though it's slow work and dangerous given the proximity to combat zones. Water service has been restored in some communities. Communications networks are gradually coming back online. It's incremental progress, but it's progress nonetheless.
Every light that comes back on is a small victory. Every phone that can make a call is a connection restored. Every faucet that runs clean water is a piece of normalcy reclaimed. We need to celebrate these small victories, to recognize that even in the midst of catastrophe, dedicated people are working to restore services, to help their communities, to rebuild what's been broken.
The fuel situation is improving slightly as emergency shipments reach critical areas. Gas stations in evacuation zones are being resupplied, though rationing is in effect. People are being allowed to purchase limited quantities of fuel to continue evacuations or to power generators. The long lines and occasional fights over fuel are reminiscent of the oil crises of the 1970s, but with the added urgency of people fleeing a war zone.
Rationing is going to become a feature of life for the foreseeable future. Not just fuel, but food, medicine, other essential goods. We're going to need to implement a fair system for distributing limited resources, and that's going to require people to be patient, to be civilized, to remember that we're all in this together. Hoarding helps no one. Sharing and equitable distribution gives everyone the best chance to survive.
We're receiving word that the first British forces have arrived at American ports on the East Coast. Royal Navy vessels and troop transports carrying elements of the British Army are offloading personnel and equipment. The arrival of these Allied forces is a significant moment, a tangible demonstration that America is not alone in this fight. Our oldest ally is here, ready to stand with us.
I'm genuinely moved by that. The special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, it's more than just diplomatic talk. It's real. They're sending their people, they're committing their resources, they're risking their national security to help us. That level of commitment and friendship, it means everything right now.
We're now 18 hours into this crisis. Dawn is breaking on the East Coast. The sun is rising on the first full day after the attacks. We're going to be able to see the damage, assess the situation more clearly. I expect the news is going to be difficult, but light is better than darkness. Knowledge is better than uncertainty. We face this together in the full light of day.
I'm looking at early reports from coastal areas, and the damage is extensive. Buildings destroyed, infrastructure damaged, fires still burning. But I'm also seeing our flag still flying, our forces still fighting, our people still standing. We've been bloodied, but we haven't been broken. The enemy hasn't won. They've started something they're going to regret.
Over the next 3 days, the military situation evolved from desperate defense to organized counterattack. Allied forces continued to arrive in significant numbers. British, Canadian, French, German, and Polish units joined American forces in a coordinated effort to contain and then reduce enemy-held positions. The fighting was intense, urban combat of the most brutal kind, but gradually, inexorably, American and Allied forces began to reclaim territory.
Those 3 days cost us dearly. The casualties mounted into the thousands. Entire neighborhoods in Virginia Beach, Norfolk, Seattle, San Diego were reduced to rubble. The human suffering was immense. But there were also moments of extraordinary heroism, civilians and soldiers working together, communities refusing to surrender, people finding strength they didn't know they had.
By day 4, the first enemy position was fully retaken. It was a relatively minor facility, but the psychological impact was significant. We could win. We were winning. The tide was turning. Over the following week, enemy forces were systematically driven back, their beachheads reduced, their supply lines cut. The invasion force that had seemed so overwhelming in those first terrifying hours was revealed to be overstretched, undersupplied, and unsustainable.
The second week saw the liberation of major population centers. Norfolk was freed, Virginia Beach was reclaimed, Seattle was secured. The refugees began the long process of returning home, though many found their homes destroyed or uninhabitable. The work of rebuilding began even as fighting continued in isolated pockets.
By the end of the third week, organized enemy resistance on American soil had effectively ceased. Isolated holdouts remained, but the invasion was broken. The enemy coalition began suing for peace, recognizing that their gambit had failed. The cost of that failure was measured in tens of thousands of lives on both sides, in destroyed cities, in traumatized populations, in a world forever changed.
The peace negotiations took another 2 weeks. The terms were harsh: complete withdrawal of all enemy forces, reparations for the damage inflicted, war crimes tribunals for commanders who had authorized atrocities. The attacking nations had gambled everything on a swift victory and decapitation strike, and they had lost catastrophically.
The final casualty counts, compiled over the months that followed, told the story of that loss. American military deaths totaled approximately 8,300 personnel. Civilian deaths reached 6,200. Allied forces lost nearly 3,000 personnel supporting the defense. Enemy forces suffered catastrophic losses, with estimates ranging upward of 40,000 killed, wounded, or captured.
6,200 civilians. 6,200 Americans who died in their own country, killed by foreign invaders. Teachers, nurses, parents, children, people who had nothing to do with military or politics, who just wanted to live their lives in peace. Every single one of them a tragedy, a life cut short, a family destroyed.
The physical damage was extensive but repairable. Norfolk, Virginia Beach, Seattle, and San Diego all suffered significant destruction, with some neighborhoods essentially leveled. Total economic cost of the invasion and subsequent fighting was estimated at over $2 trillion. But money can be replaced. Infrastructure can be rebuilt. The psychological scars, the trauma, the loss of innocence, those can never be fully repaired.
In the aftermath, America changed in fundamental ways. The military was massively expanded. Defense spending reached levels not seen since World War II. Alliances were strengthened and formalized in ways that made clear that any attack on America would be met with overwhelming global response. The invasion had been intended to demonstrate American weakness. Instead, it demonstrated American resilience and the strength of American alliances.
The cause of the invasion, as revealed through intelligence gathering and prisoner interrogations, was a catastrophic miscalculation by the attacking coalition. They had believed that American society was so divided, so weakened by internal conflicts, that it would fragment under pressure. They had believed that allies would abandon America in its hour of need. They had believed that a swift, shocking blow would paralyze the American response. They were wrong on every count.
The political leadership of the attacking nations was overthrown in the aftermath, either through military coups or popular uprisings. The populations of those nations had not been informed of the true costs of the invasion, and when the scale of the defeat became clear, they turned on their leaders. Russia, China, and North Korea all saw regime change within a year of the failed invasion.
No American territory was permanently lost. Every inch of occupied ground was liberated. Every prisoner of war was eventually repatriated, though some bore the scars of their captivity for the rest of their lives. The United States emerged from the crisis diminished in some ways, traumatized and grieving, but also stronger in important ways, more united, more aware of what matters, more appreciative of freedom and security.
The world that emerged from this crisis was different. The balance of power had shifted. American military supremacy was reestablished beyond question. The value of alliances had been proven. The cost of aggression had been demonstrated. Wars of conquest were revealed to be not only immoral, but impractical against a united, determined democratic coalition.
In the final accounting, the invasion failed in every objective. It did not break American will. It did not divide American alliances. It did not achieve territorial gains. It cost the attacking nations their governments, their militaries, their international standing, and the lives of tens of thousands of their people. It was, by any measure, one of the most catastrophic strategic blunders in modern military history.
And yet, for all the failure of the invasion, for all the ultimate victory, America still paid a terrible price. 14,000 American lives lost, military and civilian combined, hundreds of thousands displaced, trillions in economic damage, a generation of children traumatized, cities scarred, the psychological wound of knowing that we are not invulnerable, that war can come to our shores, that nothing is guaranteed.
We carry those scars still, years later. The memorials in Norfolk, in Seattle, in San Diego, they stand as reminders of what we lost and what we preserved. The names of the dead are engraved in stone, a permanent record of the price of freedom. We visit those memorials and we remember, and we commit ourselves to ensuring that such a catastrophe never happens again.
To everyone who lived through those terrible weeks, to the families who lost loved ones, to the soldiers who fought, to the civilians who endured, to the first responders who saved lives, to the volunteers who helped refugees, to everyone who contributed in small ways and large to survival and victory, thank you. Your courage, your sacrifice, your resilience, they define the best of America in the worst of times.
This is Alex Mercer, signing off from this historical broadcast. We survived, we endured, we prevailed, and we will never forget.
This is Sierra Lane. Remember the fallen, honor the survivors, cherish the peace, and never, ever take freedom for granted. Good night, and God bless America.